Okay, great. Welcome to the Coolidge Corner Theatre, Quarantine Edition. My name is Isaac Feldberg. I'm a Boston area film critic and entertainment journalist. I'm here today with the creative minds behind Driveways, which is a beautiful story of human connection and the value in caring for one another. It's currently playing through the Coolidge's virtual screening room, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'd encourage you to check it out. If you've seen it, welcome. Joining me today are director Andrew Ahn, writers Hannah Bos and Paul Thureen, and composer Jay Wadley. We'll discuss the film here for around 20 minutes and then take audience questions through the YouTube live chat. I'd like to thank our panelists for being here, and to start things off, I know that the film originally started with you, Hannah, and Paul before it came to Andrew. In terms of kind of starting at the beginning, I wanted to ask, where did the idea for Driveways originally come from for both of you?
There's a lot of things in the movie that are sort of things we wanted to tackle from our lives. I grew up in my mom's antique store in the Midwest, and it was a really kind of, looking back, it's like super magical. We would go into people's homes often after they've died as a really little kid, and I'd see the objects that family members were left with. And a lot of times they just told so much story, and I didn't really realize, the weight of the work that family members were left with, but also just like learning about your loved ones through stuff, which I think is like a really big American thing, where we buy too many things, we collect too many things, and we work out a lot of stuff by holding on to stuff. So that was really something that we wanted to sort of explore. I also grew up with a single mom, and that relationship was really interesting to me, mining that relationship.
I grew up on a farm in Minnesota, and my dad was almost 50 when I was born. And I was a kid, a kind of a Cody-ish kid who would throw up before every karate class and every piano recital, and just if kids were mean. And I always got along better with adults. And so I had just these sort of formidable relationships growing up that were with adults. And then in the last few years, my parents have been living with my sister and her son. And so watching my dad, who was almost 90 at the time, and sort of a very quiet, guy who didn't really tell stories about his life, sort of at this time in his life, sort of him being aware and saying so about being aware of how quickly it seemed like time had passed. And for the first time, sort of sharing these stories with my nephew Leo and hearing how they would interact with each other. And so Hannah and I met at undergrad and have known each other for years, and we know each other's families very well. And so I think from the start, it was always this triangle, and a lot of it came from sort of this really, really special relationship that Hannah and her mom had. And then sort of that triangle, and sort of triangulating with my life experience with sort of older people. And we started as playwrights and written a lot of plays about growing up. And I think that that's something that we're always interested in, and is sort of a vivid part of our memories and lives, and sort of looking at these three characters at these different stages in their lives, and sort of figuring out how to birth a story out of that. That's sort of where we started.
Thank you. And given that the specificity of Driveways really does come through in this film, it feels very personal. It feels sometimes like a recollection of childhood. And that was something that really stuck out to me and I found really beautiful. Andrew, for you in coming onto this project, did you think about that at all? And kind of what was your initial experience of finding your way into this story?
When I first got the screenplay from our producer, one of our producers, Joe Piro, he sent me the screenplay for Driveways, and said, hey, I think you might really respond to this. And I read it, and I just fell in love with it. The quality of the writing, the depth of these characters, and for me, this really kind of magical way of articulating small moments, but have them feel emotionally epic, like that to me is something that I really I feel like it is who, part of who I am as a filmmaker. And thinking about Cody, like, I was I wasn't as pukey as Paul was, maybe as a kid, but I definitely understood that kind of like sensitivity and like not wanting to like wrestle with like the neighborhood boys. That was something that I wanted to find a way into visually, cinematically, really see this film through Cody's point of view. And so it's just kind of being really intimate with him, being really intimate with all of these characters, and just finding access to them in a way that allowed us to understand what they're going through, but then also to give them space, and that kind of respect and kind of desire for these characters to be human beings and not just puppets that I put on screen, like that humanity that I'm really looking for, and trying to imbue in the film is something that I think allows for all of us to kind of see ourselves, like that we see ourselves in human beings and not just these like two-dimensional caricatures. And so yeah, I really I read this and it was very immediate. Like I wanted to do it and I wanted to make it. And when I met Hannah and Paul and they told me like, oh, like this is the most personal thing that they've ever written, and their favorite thing that they had ever written, it made me want to make it even more, because I find personal stories just that much more compelling. It also put a lot of pressure on me. I was really scared about it. But they trusted me, and that kind of trust was kind of the beginning of this just environment and creative philosophy that I wanted to foster, create like for the rest of the production. I wanted everybody to trust each other. I wanted everybody to feel like they could be vulnerable with each other, because that's the only way we could make something kind of as delicate as Driveways.
Of respecting that specificity that you're talking about and how personal that was. I know that the script was originally written to take place in the Midwest, but you guys ended up shooting in the Hudson Valley and shifting that location. Can you all tell me a little bit about where in the development process that change in setting happened?
That was something that, a lot of it came down to like production necessity, a lot of people were based in New York, and even just like traveling Brian Dennehy, who could get to the Hudson Valley a little bit easier than he could like Western Illinois, but it was still like it was a conversation, and we ultimately did like a very in-depth scout of the Hudson Valley, and then it kind of just like worked out in a way that we centered the film the film shoot in Poughkeepsie, which is where Paul and Hannah like met in college,
right.
And so even though we kind of displaced it from like the original like inspiration, I'm really glad that the place still has like meaning for for Hannah and Paul.
Completely. And one of the elements of Driveways that really adds to the emotionality of it, really brings you in and keeps you with these characters, is the score, this gorgeous piano and violin score. I know in your past film, Spa Night, Andrew, you relied heavily on diegetic sound. You didn't have a score, and that really brought you close to the characters in a different way. For you, Andrew, and for Jay, you in composing this score, what was the process like of finding the score of Driveways?
Take it away, Jay.
Well, I think, I think first and foremost, we kind of, I think, agreed on the fact that the score needed to really respect the the sort of intimacy of the film and the characters in the film, and not sort of take a major sort of front seat approach to the film, because it's like, yeah, there's so much character to be explored there, just that's already there in the script and already there in the way that Andrew shot the film and directed the film. And so I think just like finding some type of vibe and voice that was a very, very delicate hand in approaching the narrative and the various storylines, and something that's like, just like not too heavy-handed, because there's also the possibility that any type of score could have just like taken the whole thing in an overly sentimental sort of fashion, and really done a disservice to the subtleties of the storytelling, I think. So, we played around with a couple different sounds. We ultimately landed on sort of a felted piano, which like, there's something about like the sort of intimacy of the miking of the piano and the closeness that you hear sort of all of these imperfections and with the felt, the softness to it, and trying to sort of find our way in first through a sound that seemed to be complementary to the actual fabric of the story itself.
What I really loved about my initial conversations with Jay, was that we talked about the script, and the story from an emotional point of view. It wasn't like, oh, like let's do these instruments, or it was very much just kind of the way that I would talk to an actor, or the way that I would talk to Hannah and Paul, and so that for me felt really right, that as long as Jay really kind of felt the story, that whatever he composed would be like super beautiful. And we did have to make those like kind of choices at some point about like, oh, like I guess this is the instruments that we're using, but even those were coming from like a story point of view, from a character point of view. Like I love the felted piano because I was listening to the score like driving the other day, and you can hear like the finger hit the key in this way that just like, oh, like you think of the person playing it, and like the human behind the music is so present in this like kind of subconscious way that I think it's one of my favorite parts of having made Driveways, because Isaac, as you mentioned, like I didn't have score on Spa Night, and so I was a little bit nervous about it, but Jay is a really wonderful collaborator, and the kind of composer that for me like feels like the perfect fit to do something as delicate and as emotional as the score in Driveways.
Thank you for that, both of you. For those of us just joining now, I'm here with the director, writers, and composer of Driveways. We're currently discussing the film. If you have a question that you would like to add, you can do so in the YouTube live chat, and we'll be taking audience questions toward the end. In terms of continuing to talk about Driveways and the delicacy of it, and the way that you found that it's very personal nuance to the story in a lot of places, I loved so many of the little touches in the film, from the way that Cody eats bugles correctly toward the beginning, and the scene where he stomps out Kathy's cigarette. There are so many little moments in it that feel just like details that you might not notice in a movie that isn't paying attention quite as much as the one that you guys have made. How much of that was scripted? How much was improvised? How did you kind of find the balance of these very specific little touches within a larger story? Maybe Andrew first. I'm sorry, I had to pick.
No, it's good. A lot of it was scripted. Again, like Hannah and Paul, like they have this beautiful observational quality to their writing that like really spoke to me, and so like bugles, like that was written. That was written. That and actually Lucas like didn't know he didn't know what that was. Like he like didn't understand like how to eat them. And then our set medic actually like, taught him how to eat, put them on his fingers. And then he like picked it up real quick. But, and then there are other moments that, shifted slightly. One of my favorite moments in the script and in the film is when Cody like is kind of playing in the grass, and it's like very dreamy, and and that was actually like a very specifically written moment where like Cody finds an ant on a blade of grass, and it like kind of travels on his finger, and I was like super excited for it. And like our production designer Charlotte Royer had like found like the ant that she wanted to like crawl, and then we were about to shoot the scene, and my assistant director said like, it's gonna rain in 15 minutes. Like we have to get this scene done in 10. And I was like, forget the ant, like Lucas, just play with the grass. You love the grass. And he did a great job. Like he really likes, he looks like he's really enjoying it. And then other moments were, total surprises, that moment that you mentioned, Isaac, where like Lucas stomps out the cigarette, that was something that my cinematographer, Heejin Kim, noticed that Lucas was doing as an actor, just kind of for fun. And we decided to get a special shot of it because it just said so much about Kathy and Cody's characters and their relationship.
I just want to say that blade of grass moment is now one of my favorite. And also, things happen in editing. And also, like, I think that scene happens right after the Thanatopsis poem now. And I don't think that's where it was in the script. And it's just so perfect. And him playing with grass at that moment is so perfect. And so some of the details are intentional. And then Andrew just has, such an eye for detail as well. And I think that's, we just love that so much.
And Jay, a composer on a film looks at it in a very different way from anyone else who's working on it. Do you have any favorite moments and driveways that you'd like to highlight?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, honestly, the Thanatopsis and grass playing moment is also one of my favorite moments. And then the moment when Cody goes back to the VFW with Dell and is playing bingo. It's just one of my favorite score moments, but also like one of just my favorite moments in the film, where Cody kind of gets this moment to kind of feel a part of a group, and it's just like, it's so warm, and it's something that, like, I don't know, I very much identified with a lot of things in this film, from growing up and having a grandfather who was somewhat of a hoarder as well. So like there were a lot of personal things in this movie that helped draw me in and kind of help me identify with these characters. And like, I don't know, those two moments, the Thanatopsis moment and with Cody playing in the grass and the bingo thing, really resonated with me a lot.
I really loved that element of driveways, that these emotional moments, for example, at Cody's birthday party, he ends up having it at the bingo, like playing bingo at the DFW, not at the roller rink where you would kind of assume a kid would spend his birthday. How did you guys approach kind of that scene? Because it feels so natural in the movie, but there's almost like a scary quality to the roller rink, and a really comforting one in the DFW, both from a writing and a filming perspective.
Andrew actually found the roller rink. Originally, it was, sort of a mahogany, in our minds, it was like a mahogany sad pizza parlor kind of place where there was a deal on chicken fingers. I don't even remember what was in the script now. But then Andrew found the Hyde Park roller rink, and it had been closed for a while at one point, but it was actually somewhere that in college, Paul and I would go to, and it was behind this diner, and it was kind of one of those things that looked like a relic of the past in the best possible ways. So when Andrew was like, what if we change location to this roller rink? We were like, yes, amazing idea. And it, in the long run, it's just so much more perfect and stressful and loud and the opposite of the VFW. And it's also, I'm a huge Stella Dallas moment. And when we were writing this and we thought, you know, what is this moment for Cody? I was like, it's his Barbara Stanwyck, no one's showing up at the party moment, you know? I mean, it's not, but that's our weird Driveways version of total utter disappointment of no one coming to your party.
There's a very like quick moment when Cody is like disappointed that like no one's showing up, where we hold on him for just like a little bit longer so that I could keep this hiccup that Lucas like has, and I kind of wanted it to, you know, like be like this thing that maybe you know, people noticed and thought maybe he was gonna throw up like all over the cake or something. But yeah, like I that roller rink, as soon as I saw it, like I was like, oh, it's just so like overwhelming for like a quiet kid who plays, you know, in the grass, and we had so much fun doing it, you know, that we ended up having our rap party at the roller rink, and our like rap shirts are like, they say like Driveways cast and crew, but then also like Hyde Park roller magic.
Yeah.
You know, like it was just like I really loved like the time that we spent there. It felt kind of like summer camp, you know, and I think maybe because we had Lucas, and Lucas also had his two siblings that were there, like it had this kind of magical summer camp, you know, kind of feeling to it. And so, yeah, you know, I think those kind of moments in the script, you know, or in the film, you know, like I think they kind of came about because we were just being open and present, you know, like in that environment with the people that we were with.
Completely. And in terms of talking about the actors on the film who are all terrific, I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss Brian Dennehy. And this is one of his final performances. He passed last month. And my condolences to all of you. I know in working with him, you likely got to know him quite a bit. What was it like, the experience of working with Brian on this project, and how have you all been holding up since his passing?
You know, it's the release of the film feels so bittersweet, you know, because we've gotten such wonderful, you know, like feedback and responses to the film, and people praising Brian's performance, and I just wish that he were around to, you know, to hear it, and I think he, you know, he would have really loved like doing these Zoom Q&As. Like it would have been hilarious, I think. Just like Brian, you know, dealing with the technical, you know, side of all these Zoom Q&As. You know, we've been in touch with his family, and you know, I think it's just, I'm very honored and so happy to have worked on this project, because I feel like it serves as such a great tribute to him. Not just how like immensely talented he was as an actor, and how much he loved it, but also just how generous and kind he was as a human being.
Completely. Does anyone else have anything to add on that note? We've got a few audience questions, so we can also move to that if you guys are game.
Sure.
Sure, yeah.
We actually have a Brian Dennehy specific one from Jason on Instagram, which is that he had never seen Brian Dennehy in a movie before and hadn't realized the extent and the volume of his work. Do any of you have a favorite Brian Dennehy performance outside of Driveways that you think Jason should revisit next?
Oh, that's
Well,
a great.
you can't revisit this, but I will just preface and say that in college, I saw the greatest play ever. He was on Broadway in Death of a Salesman, and I grew up in Chicago seeing him on stage. So just personally, you know, I saw him on stage, and when I found out that he was going to do our movie, it was pretty incredible for me, because his Death of a Salesman was the best I'd ever seen. It was unbelievable. And then it was just remarkable to get to work with him. And he was so kind and wonderful. But maybe someone else has a...
Well, we saw that. I know that there is a film version of that, but I'm not sure but I'm not sure. I haven't seen that, so I'm not sure how that holds up. But we came up seeing him in theater and knew him as a theater actor. But he has, an incredible roster of credits.
I'll say like my brother, who like doesn't really care that I'm a filmmaker, like I'm just like his little brother. He's never cared about like any of my work. I don't know if he's even seen any of it. But when I told him I was making this movie with Brian Dennehy, he was like, the sheriff from Rambo. And he was like so excited for me. And like I remember Brian, this is very silly, but like the first thing I had seen Brian in was like Tommy Boy, and I actually just like recently watched a clip of it again just to like see Brian in that film, and he's so good. Like it's a really like it's a like a fun movie, but like he's just so charismatic. And then on the dramatic end, I'll say this is something that a lot of people haven't seen that I really recommend. Belly of an Architect, the Peter Greenaway film. Brian is so good in it, and it's such a bizarro film, but I think like some of Brian's best work. I think it's kind of undeniable what he's doing there.
And for you, Jay, do you have any performances you want to share?
I mean, Rambo is definitely, and of course, Tommy Boy. Those are like the classic ones. But I actually meant to go back and revisit Cocoon.
Yes.
Which I haven't seen in forever, but yeah, because I don't think when I saw Cocoon I would have known who Brian Dennehy was at that age. It's been many years. So.
He was still doing, after he did our movie, he went to LA and he did Krapp's Last Tape and Huey. He was doing plays. Like he was still doing plays and doing theater, and he loved being on set, and he loved TV, and he loved film. And he was a theater guy, and he was still doing plays. Yeah.
And those are hard plays.
Those are hard plays. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got some questions coming in now. People are definitely finding the YouTube.
Cool.
I'm not sure who this one is for specifically. I would, for any of you who want to respond, and from Robert on YouTube, we have, the film doesn't feel overtly about gender or sexual identity, but as a boy who grew up gay, I noticed little touches. Was this something I'm reading into the subtext too much, or was it sort of intentionally explored? That's from Robert.
I'll talk as like the gay here. It was definitely something that was kind of like like seeded in the story, like from the the beginning, but I think it wasn't necessarily like sexuality that we were like trying to really like kind of hammer. It was more just like this kind of sensitivity to the world. And I think, because I'm gay, and because my costume designer's gay, like we had certain things like the necklace and the bracelets that would just seemed like kind of like fun touches. But ultimately for me, it's kind of what I mentioned before, where I want the people that you see on screen to feel like they exist outside of the frame, outside of this like 83 minutes that you spend with them. And so for me, it's like that's Cody's life to live, and for him to figure out, it didn't make any sense for me to like have Cody like sneak out to the local gay Poughkeepsie, gay bar, and like look at it like longingly from a distance, like, that just doesn't make any sense. Like he's 9, and so yeah, I just wanted to be really subtle about it.
We have in the final mock-up, I'm not sure if everybody else is reading we hear in that final monologue where Del talks about, he sort of skirts the subject, talking about his daughter, and his daughter's his daughter's lady friend, which is sort of like a term that Midwesterner that I've heard from Midwesterners about, oh, her and her lady friend, and sort of that coded language, and sort of just the idea that he had regrets on how, hinting at sort of struggles that she would have had growing up, and him having, looking back and feeling regretful about that, but sort of leaving that as far as Cody's sensitivity or Del's regret, sort of leaving it sort of kindly open.
And that if Cody looked back in 10 years to this conversation, however he, is living his life, he might think about this porch conversation forever in a lot of different ways, just about regret and, listening, and sort of poignant, maybe not that day, but in the future it might be.
That is a great segue as well into just discussing that last scene of the film. From kind of old perspectives, in both in scoring and directing and writing, how did you all decide that this was where you wanted Driveways to end, and how you wanted that ending to play out?
We knew in the script that there was going to be a big old monologue. And there was a lot of work on that monologue. There were things that, got cut. There were also Andrew had a really beautiful sort of instinct about the end of where actually of Cody running off to join his friends, which I found really poignant about, I think I've used that word twice. And it was just sort of really, Andrew's a wonderful director. I've loved working with him, but it was such a great sort of look to the future, and not to end it on this dirge, but you knew that he was going to be okay. And I think there were different versions where he stayed on that porch. And it was a suggestion from Andrew to have him leave and run towards the friends, which I think was really a wonderful, that's just a small part of your question, but I think that was really a nice way to keep it hopeful.
I think also, we always knew it was going to build to that. And, you never want it to feel like a monologue, but just this idea of just their presence together, that just the idea that sort of these things would sort of start to spill out of him, some of which Cody would understand and some of which wouldn't, but that this is the person that he feels comfortable sort of talking about these things. And when he gets to the fuck him line, the way that then he does that and the build up to that line, it's just destroys me every time. And I'm just like, it's just sort of like, it's so weird to be like, I'm so glad that that's what we're like putting out into the world right now. But there's something about that moment and sort of what we've seen in their relationship that leads up to this, that it just always felt like the natural place for this to end, with them on the steps, and that happening.
Andrew?
Yeah. Go for it, Jay.
Okay.
You go first.
Yeah, well, I can talk a little bit about, how we ended up approaching that scene, and sort of what's in the musical content of that scene. And because it's such a powerful scene, and it's sort of the culmination of a couple different themes throughout the film. So sort of starting with sort of a theme that we get introduced to as Brian is sort of eating alone early on in the film, that is sort of, it starts to develop out of that into something that's much more deep, but we get that sense of longing and sort of a little bit of that sense of regret and longing, sort of trailed throughout the film, and that's the moment where that gets to really blossom. And then at a certain point in the conversation, it turns to Del and Cody's theme, which is just like this very simple, sort of 3-note almost melody in the piano, and then resolves into what we first heard when Cody's playing in the grass after Thanatopsis, which, I mean, all of the music has a bit of a sense of reflection, I would say, throughout the entire score. But, you know, that was a really great like moment to be able to kind of play with those different thematic things and really dig into that content, even though it doesn't ever really break out of its very like confined space, you know, into something that's too sweeping or grand. It you know, it did allow like sort of one moment in the film to really dive in and explore the thematic content a bit more. And so, you know, as they're going off, as Cody's like going off and playing with his friends, is when that sort of theme from the moment in the grass actually gets its moment to develop and blossom and kind of, you know, so like, I guess theoretically, when I was thinking about scoring that, I don't know if I was thinking about that so specifically, but, you know, that's kind of how I think about approaching scenes thematically. And it's, yeah, that one is, if I had thought about it earlier, that's probably another one of my favorite moments. I've got a couple of them, but you guys made it easy because there's so much in, you know, in the script and in the way that that Andrew shot the film that is just, it's really, really touching and really moving. And it's ripe for like, you know, those sort of really emotional moments in score, but, you know, trying to do it, do all of it justice, I guess, was my goal.
I remember when I first heard the score for that, you know, that cue for that scene, the monologue, and I just remember being like, we're gonna make people cry. We've done it, you know. But yeah, like that scene, it was like kind of all the elements came together, and you know, and you know, from Brian and Lucas's performance, from, you know, the cinematography to the music to the writing, like, you know, it was kind of a nerve-wracking scene to shoot. It was actually the first thing that we shot the second week, and so we had kind of warmed up enough, but it was still pretty early in our production, and it was one of those things where it's like, if we, you know, if we didn't have it, you know, we wouldn't have a movie in a way, you know? And so we had a lot of pressure, and we shot the scene all in one day, you know, and I think it was 12 pages. Like it's a lot of stuff to get through in one day. But, you know, there's no one in the world that I could trust to do that monologue more than Brian Dennehy. You know, it's like, you're giving, you know, like, you know, Brian Dennehy a monologue like for the ages, like, and he just hit it out of the park. And, you know, there was something about that scene that, like, in kind of conceptualizing it, I was like, oh, like this is where he, you know, he just like lets it all out, you know, like it kind of like unfolds out, you know, just kind of comes out of him. But I thought what was so kind of amazing was, like, you know, like Brian does do that in that scene, but he's also just so subtle. And that to me is just the sign of like someone who, you know, not only knows what he's doing, but also has just like lived a life, and these words resonate, you know, with him. You know, that performance, you know, it's just, I think it really shows that like Brian, you know, just like one of the best actors that, you know, was working. And I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to work with him on that scene.
Thank you for that, all of you. We've got another question coming in from Jen on YouTube that is for Andrew. In your other films, Andrew, Doll and Spa Night, Korean culture and spaces featured prominently in the plot. There are Asian American actors in Driveways, but can you discuss the ways in which this project might feel different, if it does, with respect to Asian American representation? P.S. So proud of you, go Brown.
Oh. I think I know who that is. Yeah, you know, the script wasn't written specifically for Asian Americans. You know, it was open ethnicity, and I think because I was trying to find a way just to like make it feel more personal, you know, it's a little bit reductive, but I was like, hey, like, what if we made them Asian, right? And Joe Piro and James Seamus, our producers, like they were really on board with that idea, an idea that I think a lot of producers would have said no to, they would have been like, oh, like, thanks, but no thanks. And I think what was really interesting was that we didn't really make any changes to Hannah and Paul's screenplay, with that choice, because, what Hannah and Paul had done was, write, these characters who feel kind of like outsiders. And for me, like as a director, I was just thinking about like externalizing that feeling of being an outsider, like within race, and within that theme. And so, all the little like kind of, microaggressions or kind of conversations that happen, were all things that were already there in the script, So like when Linda like sees Kathy and Cody, these two Asian Americans, and says like, hey, like, I assume you're related, like that just means something different, and even just that question about like, like, where are you from? Like Michigan. It's like, really, like it was already all there, and then, for me, a really fun, like a really telling moment where Kathy and Cody are at the Realtors, played by Robin Payne. And, Kathy asks like, do you like living here? And, the realtor, who's a person of color, she's Black, like she says like, oh, it's like, I like working here, and I think that tells you everything you need to know kind of about, just the circumstances that these characters find themselves in subtle ways. I didn't want to make Driveways like an Asian American identity film in the way that I had done before. And I think, it's still really important, but, this was an opportunity to try something slightly different and to expand the kind of genre or cinema culture of like Asian American film. I will say my favorite thing that like, I like never really get the opportunity to talk about, which is so silly. I think it's after Cody plays in the grass. The next scene is, Kathy saying, hey, like, why don't you have your birthday party at the roller rink? When he walks into the porch, he takes off his shoes, and it's like very silly, but it's like for me very Asian that he just like slips off his shoes quietly in the background. And so for me, it's like I slipped it in there in ways that like made sense, that weren't showy, but like feel really lived in.
Kind of in the vein of actors, we've got a couple of questions from the YouTube. One from Deepest Dream, which is, how did you get Christine Ebersole to be in the film? And another about Jerry Adler. So we could kind of tackle those two in tandem, but for filling out the supporting cast of this movie, how did you go about casting it? And do you have any anecdotes about working with either of those actors?
Paul, do you want to take like Christine Ebersole?
Well, I forget who, when we had sort of, Christine Ebersole is, an amazing TV and film actor, but also just an amazing, amazing theater and musical theater actor who we love. And we're good friends with the playwright Doug Wright. And Christine was in his Grey Gardens and War Paint. And so, and also Andrew had worked with Doug at Sundance. So he was sort of in the family. And so when we were going to go out to Christine for the role, I called Doug and was like, could you just please put in a good word for us? Because it would be a coup to have her. And she was just sort of so perfect for the role. And so I know that Doug had been in touch with her, and soon after we got the yes. So I think that was a special get. And she's, especially if you see it in a theater with people, she just slays. I mean, she's just amazing. Yeah.
And then I think with Jerry Adler, like he had sent in a tape, like a self tape, doing some of the scenes, and I watched it and just like immediately like started weeping because he was so good. And I don't usually do this, but like like my production designer and my cinematographer, like they wanted to know who we had cast, for Roger, just to kind of inform some of their own creative decisions, and both of them cried watching the tape. Like Jerry is just so good. And my favorite thing about Jerry from set was that he just he had that kind of generous spirit that I was looking for, from everyone on set. And I remember he came in for his costume fitting, and our costume designer, Matthew Simonelli, like went into the fitting with him. And then 5 minutes into the fitting, like Matthew just like runs out to me, and he's just like, I love him. I want him to be my grandpa. Like, like he made everybody on set like fall in love with him, and that's like, it's one of the big reasons why, like Cody's birthday at the bingos, at the, playing bingo just is so good, is that like, yeah, like it was just Jerry's spirit, I love that like music cue is called Roger's Team, because it's totally, it's that there's something about like, oh yeah, like Cody's friends with Del, but he's also just like, he becomes a part of this community in this way, like open arms, they embrace him,
Also, just because it was asked specifically about those two actors, Jerry was a Broadway stage manager until he was in his 50s, I think. And he stage managed Camelot, which was one of Christine's first Broadway roles. And so it was a fun reunion for them.
I know Jerry Adler as well has such a key scene in the film as well, where he's reciting the poem that really has a lot of emotional heft to it. And you kind of have this moment of clarity for him as he's being kind of afflicted by memory loss. This suddenly comes back to him. We're getting towards the end of time for this, but in terms of just discussing one last scene, how did you guys approach having that poem in Driveways? And was it always that poem and always Roger reading it?
It was always Roger. It was always that poem. It wasn't always in that moment. In the script, it was different. But it actually happened to a family member of Paul's. Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, we were there, and an uncle of mine said it was and he was older, and it was a holiday dinner, and it wasn't clear how much sort of he was following what was going on. And then he just said, there's been something that's been rattling around in my head, and he just recited Thanatopsis out of the blue. And it was just sort of this like stunning moment that was always in the script, but it's sort of, if it's not handled correctly, it could easily feel contrived. And it's just done so beautifully, and he does it so beautifully. And I know that, we had a lot of talk in editing, if there's the scene at the grocery store with Roger, where you sort of realize that he's in, some stages of dementia. And, we had a back and forth about if that poem should happen before that scene or after that scene, because it's sort of meaningful in different ways. And I think where it landed and where it fits with everybody else's story is the right way.
Yeah, I remember shooting that scene, and like Jerry knew that poem, like backwards and forwards, like, and he's an older actor, and like he could recite it so beautifully, and just had that kind of, just that the mastery of his craft, and then also just like the kind of understanding of the emotional, moment. What was really funny was that actually the one word that he like kept getting wrong actually was the name of the teacher. Because I think in the script it's like Mrs. Storstad, and then like Jerry was like, he just kept saying Mrs. Stoddard, and and that's what's actually in the film, but he would get like word for word the rest of the scene, right? And so I always thought that was really like really funny. Jay, do you want to talk about the score?
For that moment?
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of you mean like how I approached that scene in particular? I guess it's a bit of a departure. Like there's not as it starts up. Uh, um, it doesn't necessarily call back anything prior to that. But it is sort of this sort of trickling of these of like few piano notes and string notes that are ultimately this sort of slow unfurling into landing into Cody's sort of Cody's time just like playing in the grass. But I just there couldn't be anything that was too score heavy. It needed to let the poem and let Jerry do the work, but something that sort of enhanced this sort of revelatory moment in a way that both reflects Roger and Cody sort of playing in the grass. It's sort of obviously playing off of each other in that sort of way. So
completely. Thank you for that, all of you. We're coming up on an hour here, so in terms of a final question for each of you, I don't know what kind of quarantine and our current pandemic has done to kind of any plans that you guys had for future projects, but what are you all working on right now, and kind of what can we expect from each of you in the coming year or so?
Hannah and Paul, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm working on staying healthy, washing my hands, and trying to stay sane. And I'm also continuing working on a television project that that Paul and I have been working on, which has been really exciting to have something to creatively work on during this insane bonkers time.
So we're writing on Zoom together every day. So this is sort of our daily experience. Yeah.
Yes.
I personally, I've got a few things. Luckily, I finished a lot of projects prior to this thing, so I'll have a little bit of a rollout this year, which is good. But I've got I recently finished Charlie Kaufman's new movie, which will be coming out later this year, and I'm doing sort of an experimental documentary on a man who lost his sight and learns to see again through new technology. So doing a lot of experimental things. That's called Light, Darkness, Light, which I'm pretty excited about. I get to make some crazy, weird chamber music and choir music. So.
And then, I'm writing, trying to, figure out my next feature. I've got a couple of different projects that I'm juggling. All of them are Asian American in some way. And then some of them are gay and like much more explicitly gay than Driveways. And then I'm just trying to, I'm trying to like just have hobbies to like stay kind of like sane and like feeling emotionally healthy. I've gotten onto a big houseplant kick, so I'm doing a lot of that. And then I also knit. I knit a lot of beanies. That's something that I'm doing. But yeah, I think you kind of have to balance it. I think we're also doing a lot of Zoom Q&As for Driveways, making sure that people get to know about the film. I think with a film like this, it's often through word of mouth that we get around, and so if people enjoy the film and feel like they have friends and family that would enjoy it, like please like let them know about it, and we'll continue doing Q&As and talk about the film for the foreseeable future.
Screen it at Coolidge Corner Theatre.
Yeah.
I think that will call it there on audience questions as well. I want to thank each of you for taking the time to be here, to come out to talk about Driveways. This has been a terrific conversation. The film is currently available through the Coolidge's virtual screening room. The film's score is also out and available on all streaming platforms. It is beautiful kind of music if you need to just sit and write, to have playing in the background as well. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the generous folks at FilmRise who made this possible, and of course to the Coolidge. But we will sign off for that. I hope you're all staying safe in quarantine.
Thank you.
Thank you.